When I refused to be my sister's servant, my mom threw a plate at me. I don't normally post my business online, but I felt like I had to share my story, mostly because even now, years later, it still feels completely insane when I think about it. For my entire life, I was the one who kept everything together at home, the glue and the grease, while my younger sister, Isabella, was pampered like she was a queen. I put up with it for years, just accepting it as the way things were. But when I was 22, things got worse in ways I never could have expected. Let's just say that one night, I stopped playing the part of the family servant, and what happened next turned my entire world, and there's completely upside down. To understand how a single dinner could detonate a family, you have to understand the family itself. Imagine a sitcom, but without the laugh track. Instead, you get a constant soundtrack of quiet resentments, guilt trips, and the sound of my sneakers squeaking as I run around like the household's unpaid, unappreciated intern. That was my childhood in a nutshell. I'm 24 now, but all of this kicked off when I was 22, though the groundwork was laid long before that. I have one sister, Isabella. She's 2 years younger than me. And let me tell you, she was raised as if she were the crown jewel of the universe, handcrafted by angels. Spoiled doesn't even begin to cover it. She was preserved. If she sneezed, my mother, Claudia, would materialize out of thin air with a box of tissues. My father, Victor, would chuckle and say how cute her little sneeze was. And then I would be the one tasked with finding the used tissue and throwing it away. Meanwhile, I could come home with a report card of all A's or a trophy from a wrestling tournament, and the reaction from my parents would be a lukewarm, "That's nice, son. Now, the trash needs to be taken out." The trophy would be placed on a shelf behind a vase, and the report card would disappear onto a pile of mail on the kitchen counter, never to be mentioned again. I was the default handyman, the built-in labor. Mowing the lawn? That was my job. Hauling groceries? Me. Moving heavy furniture when my mom decided to rearrange the living room for the third time in a month? Also me. I was the designated chauffeur for the little princess, driving her to her friends' houses, to the mall, to the movies, because she didn't feel like walking the 6 blocks. It was always me. And the weird part wasn't just that I was expected to do it. It was as if it was my sole purpose in life. Isabella could literally stand on the porch, watching me sweat in the summer heat while hauling 3 bags of mulch across the yard, and she'd offer commentary like she was my supervisor on a construction site. A little more to the left, I think. And my mother, Claudia, she ate it up. She's the type of person who would see me struggling through the door with 12 grocery bags at once, and her only comment would be a panicked, "Be careful. Don't drop the eggs. Your sister hates it when her yolks are broken." Not, "Let me help you." Not, "Thank you for doing that." Just a critique of my performance as the grocery mule. Victor, my father, well, forget about getting any help from him. He was a master of strategic silence, a man who would do whatever it took to keep the peace. And in our house, peace was a code word for keeping Isabella and Claudia happy. That, of course, usually meant me injuring my back while Isabella sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone and occasionally sighing with boredom. It wasn't just the physical tasks, though. The emotional and academic favoritism was so blatant, it was humiliating. When I received good grades, my father would barely look up from his newspaper. My mother would offer a flat. "That's to be expected. You're a smart boy." It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. Translation: nobody cares. This isn't an achievement. It's just you meeting the bare minimum. But let Isabella scrape by with a D in math, and you'd think she had just cured cancer. There would be a family trip for ice cream, gushing Facebook posts from my mom about how proud they were of her for trying her best, and a big production of hugs and praise in the living room. "We're so proud of you, honey. You're working so hard." She wasn't. She barely brought her homework home. The toughest part wasn't even the work I had to do. It was the way they would praise her for doing absolutely nothing. For example, I remember one time she vacuumed about 1/3 of the living room rug, got bored, and left the vacuum cleaner sitting in the middle of the floor with the cord tangled everywhere. Claudia walked in, saw the small patch of clean carpet, and clasped her hands together like she was witnessing a miracle. "Oh, look at our Isabella. So responsible, helping out around the house." Meanwhile, I was outside, covered in sweat and grime, fixing a burst sprinkler line because my dad had said, "You've got strong hands. Handle it." There was no thank you, no appreciation. It was just assumed that I would do it, that it was my job. By the time I was 20, I felt less like a son and more like a live-in employee who paid rent in the form of free labor. I was working a part-time job at a local hardware store while also attending community college, trying to save up enough to transfer to a 4-year university. But the moment I walked in the door at home, I'd find a handwritten list of duties waiting for me on the kitchen counter. Isabella, of course, was always too stressed with her studies to help. Stressed from what? Curating the perfect selfie for her Instagram feed? The car situation was a whole other level of frustrating. I had saved up every penny I earned for a year and bought my first beater, a beat-up 2003 Peugeot that rattled when it went over 50 miles per hour. But it was mine. I paid for it with my own money. I paid for the insurance. I paid for the gas. Within 3 weeks of me getting it, Isabella started demanding rides everywhere. It didn't matter if I had plans, if I had to be at work, if I was exhausted. Her logic was simple. "You're my brother. You're supposed to drive me." Of course, if I ever dared to say no, she would immediately run to Claudia, her face already crumpling into fake tears. Then the lecture would begin. Why are you being so selfish? She's your sister. Family helps family. It was a funny definition of family because no one ever asked her to help me with anything. And my father? He was a ghost in these confrontations. He would only intervene if things got really heated, and even then, he would always take Claudia's side. Just do it, son, he'd say with a weary sigh. It's not worth the fight. That was his classic line. He acted as if keeping Isabella placated was a matter of national security, and I was the foot soldier being sent on a suicide mission to accomplish it. Looking back, it felt like I was a supporting character in a long-running play where Isabella was the undisputed star. Every scene, every plot point revolved around her. All of the applause was directed at her. My job was to move the props, clean the stage after the performance, and then disappear into the wings while she took her bow. By the time I got to college, I thought I'd finally be able to break out of that role. I had some scholarships lined up, and I had a decent chance of actually building a life for myself. But the family had a way of pulling me back in. Every break, every vacation, I'd come home, and within hours, the old dynamic would snap back into place. It created this massive chip on my shoulder, a feeling that I wasn't just bringing in their groceries. I was carrying the weight of the entire family circus. And if I ever dared to speak up about it, I was resentful. That was my mother's favorite word for me. We've given you everything, she'd say, her voice dripping with indignation. How dare you talk back? What they had given me was a list of endless duties and a front row seat to the Isabella parade. So, growing up, I learned a hard lesson. I wasn't their son in the same way she was their daughter. I was their mule, and she wasn't just a golden child. She was untouchable. Claudia would defend her in any situation. Victor would remain silent, and I would be left to take the blame. But here's the thing about being a mule. You can only push one so far before it starts to kick back. And at 22, I was no longer the quiet kid who would just shut up and drive Isabella to the mall. I had learned to play smarter. I wasn't just a mule anymore. I was a mule with a plan. Being raised in a house where you're constantly required to bend over backward for everyone else teaches you to anticipate their moves. I knew Isabella was going to pull some kind of stunt eventually. She always did when she felt her authority was being challenged. And I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that Claudia would back her up without a moment's hesitation, while Victor would just sit there, pretending nothing was happening, hoping the storm would pass. So, it didn't really surprise me that everything went spectacularly wrong during dinner. What surprised me was just how far they were willing to go. There were only the four of us that night. No guests, no neighbors to impress, just the raw, unfiltered family dynamic. Claudia had made one of her signature weeknight buffets, a big bowl of pasta, a salad, and some garlic bread. I sat down at the table, mentally preparing myself for the inevitable spectacle. Isabella was slouched in her chair across from me, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone as she swiped through her social media feed like the bored queen she imagined herself to be. My father was mumbling something about some hotel reservations for a work trip. Claudia was fussing over the napkins, arranging them as if the fate of the world depended on them being folded just right. Dinner began, and for 7 beautiful, blissful minutes, everything was normal. There was the sound of chewing, some meaningless small talk about the weather, and the clinking of silverware. Then it happened. Isabella dropped her fork. It wasn't a big, dramatic event. It was just a slight slip of her fingers, and it clattered onto the hardwood floor next to her chair. She didn't blink. She didn't bend down. She just slowly lifted her eyes from her phone, stared directly at me, and said, with an air of absolute authority, "Pick that up." I actually laughed. Not a nervous, polite chuckle, but a real, genuine bark of laughter, because for a second, I honestly thought she was joking. But no, her expression was dead serious. She even cocked her chin upward, a little gesture she perfected that made her look like a villain in a Disney movie. I said, "Pick it up." My mother's head snapped up from her plate. "You heard your sister. Don't be difficult." I leaned back in my chair, my own fork still in my hand, a piece of spaghetti halfway to my mouth. "She has 2 hands," I said, keeping my voice light. "Gravity works on her the same way it works on me. If she dropped it, she can get it." Claudia reacted as if I had just cursed out the Pope at high mass. She slammed her hand down on the table, making the plates jump. "Do not start tonight. Just do it." I pointed to the fork on the floor with my own fork. "It's right there. It's not like it fell into a sewer grate. She's not physically impaired. She is perfectly capable of bending over and grabbing it herself." My father cleared his throat, the universal sign that he was about to say something useless to keep the peace. But he didn't even manage that. He just gave me that patented, disappointed dad expression, the one he reserved exclusively for me. Isabella smirked, that smug little twist of her lips that she perfected since she was in middle school. "Wow," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Do you really think you're too good to help your own family? A servant should know their place." That word, servant, it was like a switch flipped inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder. It was the sudden, shocking realization that she wasn't joking. She wasn't teasing. That's genuinely how she saw me. Not as her brother, but as her servant. I slowly set my fork down on my plate. The clink of metal on ceramic was unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. The entire table stiffened. "I'm not your servant, Isabella," I said. I used a calm, bland, conversational tone that made it perfectly clear I wasn't playing along. Claudia's voice got louder. "Stop embarrassing us. Do you have any idea how ungrateful you sound? Your sister has had a long day. The least you can do is help her out." I glanced across the table at Isabella, who was now sitting back in her chair with her arms folded, looking like she was enjoying the show. "A long day of what?" I asked. "Taking selfies? Scrolling through Instagram?" "Yeah, sounds absolutely exhausting." That's when my mother snapped. She grabbed the nearest object, which happened to be her half-eaten plate of salad, and she threw it at me. There was no warning, no hesitation. It was just a sudden explosion of pure, unrestrained fury. The plate flew across the table and smashed against the side of my face. For a split second, I didn't feel any pain, just a profound, bewildering shock. Lettuce and vinaigrette dressing went everywhere. Then the sting came, sharp and burning, and I could feel a warm trickle of blood streaming down my cheek. I shot to my feet, my hand flying to my face, and just stared at her. Claudia was standing now, too, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury, as if I was the one who had just committed an act of violence. My father finally pushed his chair back, but he didn't come to me. He just stood there, frozen, a statue of inaction. And Isabella? She didn't even flinch. She just leaned closer, a slow, triumphant smirk spreading across her face, and said, "See? Servants don't talk back." I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I just turned, without a word, and walked out of the dining room. The sound of my chair scraping across the tile floor was the only response I gave them. Upstairs, in the privacy of my own room, I locked the door and finally allowed myself to breathe. My cheek was throbbing, and my shirt was stained with blood and vinaigrette. I took out my phone, opened the camera app, and started taking pictures. The two deep cuts on my cheekbone, the rapidly developing swelling, the disgusting pile of food still clinging to my shirt. Every click of the camera shutter felt like a small act of defiance. Proof. That's what I needed. Not screaming matches, not pointless arguments, just cold, hard, indisputable evidence. And as I sat there, pressing a towel against my bleeding face, I knew something with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about a fork on the floor. This was about years of being seen as a tool, a helper, a thing to be used. This was about years of being invisible until someone needed something. Tonight wasn't just a random outburst. It was the inevitable culmination of every single time I had let them treat me like a servant. But those days were over. The mule with a plan had just gathered his first piece of evidence. After the dinner incident, a strange, tense quiet settled over the house. Claudia acted as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just thrown a ceramic plate at my face with the intent to injure. My father remained glued to his laptop, his brow furrowed over his resort emails, as if they were a matter of life and death. And Isabella, she just strutted around with that infuriatingly smug sneer, as if she had finally and definitively put me in my place. But here's the thing about the idea of freedom. Once you get a taste of it, you can't get it out of your head. I wasn't going to sit back and let them hit the reset button to pretend it was just another Tuesday night. So, I started being more aware. I started gathering more evidence, keeping my mouth shut when it was strategic, and carefully planning my responses. A few days later, I was out in the driveway, working on my car. The hood was up, my hands were covered in grease, and the sun was beating down. It was one of those quiet, peaceful afternoons where you can actually feel at peace. That is until she showed up. Isabella wandered out of the house as if she owned the entire property, a phone in her hand and a regal air about her. She leaned against the fender of the car, right next to me, and said, with that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted to be particularly cruel, "You know, no matter what you think, you'll always just be my little servant. That's all you're ever going to be." I slowly wiped my hands on a dirty rag and looked up at her. A part of me, the old me, wanted to laugh it off. Another part of me wanted to tell her to get lost. Instead, I leaned against the car, mirrored her casual posture, and smirked right back at her. "That's funny," I said, "because I don't remember seeing any other staff around here keeping this mansion from falling apart. Seems to me that without this particular servant, the whole circus grinds to a halt." Her smile faltered for a half second. She then leaned in closer, as if she were preparing for a real battle. "Don't you talk back to me. Everyone knows you're just bitter because Claudia and Victor love me more." I just tilted my head. "Yeah, congratulations. You're the MVP of doing absolutely nothing. That's a real impressive title you've got there." And that's when she pulled her classic move, the one that had always worked when we were younger. She took a theatrical step back, deliberately flung her own phone to the ground for dramatic effect, and let out a blood-curdling scream. He hit me. He shoved me. I froze. Not because I felt guilty, but because I knew exactly what was coming. Like clockwork, Claudia and Victor stormed out of the house as if they had been waiting in the wings for their cue. Claudia's eyes widened in horror as she saw her precious, perfect daughter Fate crying on the ground. Victor's jaw clenched as if he were preparing to deliver a closing argument in a courtroom. Claudia rushed to Isabella, gathering her up in a dramatic hug as if she had just survived a war. "What did you do to her?" she shrieked at me. "How could you put your hands on your own sister?" I opened my mouth to explain, to tell them that I hadn't touched her, but Victor piled on, his voice booming across the lawn. "You're a monster, son. She's your sister, and you dare to hurt her? What is wrong with you?" I just stood there, my hands still covered in motor oil, staring at the three of them as if I were watching some bizarre, badly acted play. I hadn't touched her. I hadn't even been close to her. But in their court of opinion, her word was law, and I was already guilty. And that's when salvation arrived in the most unexpected form. Mr. Henrik Dahl, our next-door neighbor, was walking up the sidewalk with his little terrier. He's an older guy, a retired Navy captain with a no-nonsense attitude and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He'd seen the whole thing from his front porch. He came to a halt at the edge of our driveway, adjusted the brim of his cap, and said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard, "That boy didn't touch her. I watched the whole darn thing. She threw her own phone and started screaming. The girl is lying through her teeth." A profound silence fell over the driveway. Complete and utter silence. Claudia's jaw literally dropped open. Victor started to stammer something about a misunderstanding, but Mr. Dahl cut him off. "Don't you dare. I've been watching this garbage for years. You people treat that boy like dirt, while that girl walks around like she owns the world. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves." Isabella's fake tears stopped instantly. She just stood there, caught red-handed, her eyes flashing with a fury that looked like she could melt the pavement. Claudia mumbled something about private family business. Mr. Dahl just shook his head in disgust. "No, ma'am, that ain't family. That's bullying, and everyone on this block sees it." Then he just turned and walked away, leaving the truth bomb he had just dropped hanging in the air. I swear, in that moment, I almost laughed out loud. For the first time in my entire life, someone from the outside had spoken the truth aloud, and my parents had absolutely no response. They just stood there, looking like someone had pulled the rug out from under them, their entire narrative shattered by a cranky old man and his dog. That night, I sat in my room, replaying the scene over and over in my head. Mr. Dahl hadn't just called them out. He had validated me. He had proven that I wasn't insane, that it wasn't all in my head. Other people saw it, too. And while I was sorting through some old boxes in my closet, looking for a misplaced textbook, I found something else that added fuel to the fire that was starting to burn inside me. It was a stack of old letters from my late grandfather, Victor's father. I'd seen them before, but I'd never really read them carefully. This time I did. And one line, in his elegant, looping cursive, hit me like a ton of bricks. "Don't ever let anyone turn you into a mule, son. A man builds his own path. Carrying everyone else's burdens will only break your back." I must have read that sentence a dozen times, because that's exactly what I had been doing. I had been carrying them, their emotions, their chores, their expectations, their nonsense. And for what? For nothing. That was the moment the vague idea of leaving solidified into a concrete plan. I wasn't just daydreaming about escaping anymore. I was going to make it happen. I started small, methodically. I went to a different bank in the next town over and opened a secret checking account. I started siphoning off whatever cash I could skim from my paychecks and side jobs, depositing it bit by bit. I learned how to sneak into Victor's home office late at night, when everyone was asleep, to use his scanner to make digital copies of my birth certificate and social security card. Every small, secret act of rebellion felt like breaking a link in a chain. I didn't stop there. I reached out to Mr. Matteo Rosi, a family friend I'd always looked up to. He was a retired contractor, a gruff but fair man who gave advice without any sugarcoating. I told him what was going on, and instead of dismissing me or telling me to make peace, he just nodded and said, "It's about damn time you cut loose. You got brains, kid. Use them. Don't let them guilt you into wasting your 20s cleaning up their messes." His words hit me hard because he was right. I wasn't just planning anymore. I was already halfway out the door. The only difference was they didn't know it yet. To them, I was still the obedient son, the built-in handyman, the mule who did whatever was asked of him. So I wore the mask. I fixed the leaky faucet. I carried the heavy groceries. I nodded when Claudia gave me a new list of chores. I even laughed when Isabella tried her pathetic little power plays. On the outside, it looked like I'd fallen back in line. But on the inside, every errand I ran was just another day closer to my departure. However, one of the drawbacks of playing a double game is that the other side can sometimes get suspicious. And Isabella was always the curious type, the kind of person who would snoop through your backpack just because she was bored. I should have seen it coming. One afternoon, I was upstairs in the bathroom, shaving, when I heard her bedroom door slam open, followed by the creak of mine. My stomach constricted. She was in my room. I quickly rinsed my face, threw a towel over my shoulder, and walked out just in time to catch the tail end of it. She was on her knees, rifling through my belongings. My duffel bag, the decoy one, was half unzipped on the floor. I had planted it there weeks ago, filled with old gym clothes, a pair of worn-out sneakers, and a folder of printed-out resumes for local, dead-end jobs. It was all a carefully constructed forgery designed to be discovered. It was a trap, and she swam right into it. Her eyes lit up when she saw the folder of resumes. "Oh my God, Claudia, Victor, get in here quick," she shrieked. I just leaned against the door frame, wrapped the towel around my neck, and pretended to be bored. "Find anything you like in there." Claudia rushed in, her hands still damp from washing dishes, with Victor trailing behind her, a frown already etched on his face. Isabella shoved the papers at them. "Look, he's planning to leave. He has a bag packed and everything." Claudia's face contorted as if she had just discovered a criminal mastermind in her midst. "Is this true? Are you sneaking around behind our backs?" I just shrugged. "What, that my gym stuff." I figured I'd finally stop skipping leg day. Victor grabbed the resumes from her hand and scanned them as if they were top-secret FBI files. "These are job applications." "Yeah," I said casually. "For places around here. I figured I'd toss a few out there. Can't exactly plan on living here forever." "Right." That line, I could see, irritated Claudia. She started pacing, muttering under her breath about loyalty and family obligation. Isabella was practically vibrating with excitement, just waiting for the hammer to fall on me. But I just leaned back, my arms crossed, and watched them spiral. Finally, I said, "Relax. It's called planning for the future. You want me to freeload off you forever? You complain when I don't contribute, and you complain when I try to contribute somewhere else. You guys need to make up your minds." Victor looked at me, then at the bag, and then back at me. He let out a long, weary sigh, the classic, "I don't want to deal with this" sigh. "Fine," he said, "but no more secrets. If you're looking for a job, you tell us." "Understand." "Crystal clear," I responded, hiding a smirk. They left the room, Isabella trailing behind them, her face a mask of disappointment that her big gotcha moment had fizzled out. As soon as her door closed, I zipped up the decoy duffel, tossed it into the corner, and sat down on my bed. On the inside, I was grinning from ear to ear. They had absolutely no idea that the real paperwork, the bank statements, the copied IDs, my actual plan, and the bus schedules to Seattle, were all hidden in a shoebox under a loose floorboard in my closet. That was the moment I knew I had them. They thought they had caught me. They thought they were still in control. But I was running 2 games at once. They could only see the one I wanted them to see. Still, the scare was a valuable reminder that I was walking a fine line. If they suspected for a second what I was really up to, they would tighten their grip, and my escape would become 10 times harder. So, I tightened up my own game. I started treating every interaction, every move, as if it were a game of chess. I know some people reading this might be thinking, "You're 22 years old. Why not just leave already?" And on paper, they'd be right. I could have just walked out the front door at that very moment. But leaving broke, with no official documents, no backup plan, and no job lined up would have played right into their hands. I had no one else to fall back on. I was completely on my own. They would have used it as proof that I was unstable, that I couldn't make it on my own. And worse, I might have had to crawl back when things got tough. That was not going to happen. I wasn't just planning to leave. I was planning to leave so cleanly, so completely, that they would never be able to pull me back in. Every dollar I saved, every document I copied, every step of this meticulous escape plan was designed to sever all of their strings at once. When Claudia asked me to run errands, I'd volunteer with a smile. It gave me the perfect excuse to go to the library, use their computers to send out real job applications to companies in Seattle, and check my secret email account. When Victor asked me to move some old boxes up to the attic, I did it without complaint, and then used the opportunity to stash some extra cash in an old boot where no one would ever look. When Isabella would tease me for still living at home, I would just smile because I knew, with a certainty that was like a warm coal in my chest, that I wouldn't be there for much longer. But the tension in the house was rising. Every dinner felt like a cross-examination. Claudia's glances became sharper, more suspicious, as if she was constantly waiting to catch me in a lie. Isabella started throwing little jabs at me all the time, trying to provoke me into an outburst so she could run and play the victim again. My heart would still race sometimes because I knew that if they ever found my real stash, if they ever discovered my true plan, it would all be over. They would lock me down tighter than ever before. The danger wasn't losing the game. The danger was being discovered too early. And that made every single day feel like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. But I wasn't afraid. I was focused. I was sharper than I had ever been in my life. One night, when everyone else was asleep, I took out a small notebook and started listing the final steps. Bus to downtown station. Train ticket to Seattle. Call Mr. Rosie to confirm job lead. Pack only what you absolutely need. The 2 duffel bags were already pre-packed and hidden under the back seat of my car. Every move was meticulously planned. I sat back and looked at the list, my cheeks still faintly tender from where the plate had hit me. And I smiled. They thought I was trapped. They thought they still owned me. But they were wrong. The mule with a plan was almost gone. And this time, there was no turning back. I knew it was coming to a head. But the thing about crazy, controlling people is that they don't give up easily. When they sense you pulling away, instead of letting go, they dig in deeper. They grab at whatever they can to maintain their grip. And that's exactly what my family did. It was a Sunday evening, late enough that the house was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. I had just finished clearing my plate from dinner when Claudia's voice cut through the air like a siren. Family meeting. Now, the tone was not optional. It was the same tone she had used when she'd found out Isabella had been stealing beer from the garage at 17, and the same one she'd used when I had forgotten to maintain the lawn for a single week. It was her laying down the law voice. I sat back down at the dining room table. Victor and Isabella were already there, their faces grim, waiting as if this were a prearranged trial. Claudia stood at the head of the table, her hands on her hips, looking like she was the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one. I didn't even flinch. I just leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and prepared myself for the performance. Claudia began, her voice dripping with accusation. Your attitude, lately, has been unacceptable. You've been distant, belligerent, and frankly, ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I just tilted my head. What you've given to me, or what you've taken from me? Her eyes narrowed into slits. Victor cleared his throat. This family only works when everyone understands their roles, son. You're upsetting the balance. Translation, I said, a smirk playing on my lips. You mean it only works when I act like the unpaid butler and I jerk my head toward Isabella, gets to act like royalty. Isabella gasped, a perfect theatrical sound, as if I had just spat on the Holy Grail. You are pathetic. You will always be the servant. That is your place in this family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and slid it across the polished surface of the table. The screen lit up at the photo I had taken weeks ago, my bruised and cut cheek, the two distinct incisions from the plate, the swelling, the dry blood. That's funny, I said gently, because where I come from, servants are rarely assaulted for refusing to pick up a fork. That isn't discipline. That's abuse. The room fell silent for a moment. Claudia's face drained of all color, and then flooded with a dark, furious red. Victor's jaw stiffened, and Isabella's smirk, for the first time in months, completely vanished. Delete that, Claudia commanded, her voice loud and shaky. You're twisting things. You provoked me. I laughed, a sharp, quick sound devoid of humor. Yeah, sure. As everyone can see, I provoked a flying plate with my face. This is when my father, the man of peace, finally lost his cool. He grabbed his own glass of water from the table, slammed it down with a crack, and yelled, "Enough!" And then, in one incredibly stupid split-second loss of control, he threw the glass directly at me. Time seemed to slow down. I saw it spinning through the air, water trailing behind it like a comet's tail. It smashed against the edge of the table, right in front of me, and exploded, spraying glass shards everywhere. A few pieces nicked my arm, stinging like angry bees. But here's the kicker. Some of the shards ricocheted back at them. A small piece cut Victor's hand. Another piece hit Isabella on her bare leg. And just like that, the masters of the mansion looked less like royalty and more like clowns caught in their own chaotic mess. I rose from my chair slowly, brushing the glittering shards of glass off my clothes. My voice, when it came out, was chillingly calm. There's no twisting this. You just proven my entire point. You're not just toxic. You're dangerous. Claudia was scrambling, her hands flailing. It was an accident. He didn't mean it. I held up my phone, the camera app already open, and started methodically photographing the new evidence, the shattered glass, the fresh cuts on my arm, the mess on the floor. It doesn't matter what he meant. This isn't just a family drama anymore. This is evidence. Isabella was quiet for once, her eyes wide with shock. She finally realized that the game had changed, that her usual tactics were useless now. I grabbed my bag from under the chair, slung it over my shoulder, and looked each of them dead in the eye. You thought you could keep me trapped here forever. But tonight, you've given me every reason I need to make this official. Claudia's voice was a hoarse whisper. What do you mean, official? I said, taking a step toward the front door, that I'm going to press charges. Did you really think I was just going to let you keep throwing things at me until one day it was something worse than a plate? No, this is over. Now, Victor started to move forward, as if he was going to stop me, but a single glance at the phone still in my hand froze him in his tracks. He knew. They all knew. The power dynamic in that house had just permanently, irrevocably flipped. I strolled out of the room as if I owned the place, their voices a panicked, furious, pleading mess, fading behind me. But I didn't stop, because I realized then that my plan wasn't just to leave quietly anymore. It was to burn the bridge behind me so thoroughly that they could never, ever try to drag me back. And nothing lights a bridge on fire faster than the truth, especially when it's backed up by cold, hard, photographic proof. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. But my mind wasn't racing with panic. It was steady and clear, as if someone had finally wiped the fog from a windshield. Every bruise, every shard of glass, every photo on my phone wasn't just proof anymore. It was fuel. By the next morning, I had my duffel bags in the trunk of my car, my folder of documents on the passenger seat, and my departure planned out to the minute. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just walked out the front door with the same calm I'd maintained since the glass shattered. My first stop was the police station. Walking in with a bandaged cheek and fresh cuts on my arm got me seen pretty quickly. I asked to speak with an officer, sat down at a small table in a quiet room, placed my phone on the desk, and let the pictures speak for themselves. The cop, a weary-looking guy in his 40s, swiped through the photos, his brow furrowing deeper with each one. The plate cut, the bruises from previous incidents, the broken glass littering the dining room floor. "You're saying both of these incidents involved your parents?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Yep," I said. "My mom threw the plate. My dad threw the glass. I have timestamps on all the photos, and I have a neighbor who witnessed my sister trying to frame me for another assault. His name is Henrik Dahl." He didn't argue or belittle it. He just nodded and started typing on his computer. "Looks like assault to me," he said. Hearing the word, the official legal label for what they had done, felt like a 1,000-pound weight was being lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't family drama. It wasn't discipline. It was assault. Period. They filed a report, gave me copies, and promised to follow up with Mr. Dahl about his witness statement. And just like that, the narrative I'd been trapped in for my entire life was flipped on its head. It didn't happen overnight. But a few weeks later, the charges were officially filed. And that's when the real dominoes started to fall. By that afternoon, I was at Mr. Rossi's house, the mentor who had believed me. He had a spare room ready for me and told me I could stay as long as I needed. We sat at his kitchen table. I sipped a cup of strong, black coffee, and he gave me the kind of approving nod that only old men with military haircuts can give. "Told you it would come to this," he said. "Now don't waste this chance. Go build your own life." So I did. I stayed at Mr. Rossi's for a couple of weeks, helping him with chores around his house while I finalized a job offer in Seattle. 3 weeks after I had walked out of my parents' house for the last time, I packed my duffel bags, took a bus to the train station, and bought a one-way Amtrak ticket. Watching the miles of my old life disappear out the train window, I realized I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving the entire cage behind. Within 3 weeks of arriving in Seattle, I started the new job. It was nothing fancy, just an entry-level position at a logistics company, but it was mine. It was my paycheck, my independence. There was no one telling me when to take out the trash or who I needed to serve. Seattle became my home base. At first, it was a friend's couch, then a cramped studio apartment with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall. But it was my brick wall. I cooked my own food, I set my own schedule, I lived by my own rules. And every time I accidentally dropped a fork on the floor and had to bend down to pick it up myself, I would let out a small, quiet laugh. It was a stupid, symbolic little thing, but it meant the world to me. It was my fork, my hand, my choice. Meanwhile, back home, the consequences of their actions were beginning to snowball. Claudia and Victor were stunned that the police didn't just brush it off as a family squabble. They followed through. Both of my parents were facing misdemeanor assault charges. It wasn't a felony, not at first, but it was enough to tarnish their pristine records and get the neighbors talking. And in a town like ours, gossip spreads faster than a wildfire. Claudia, who had once been the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood block parties, was now just the mom who threw a plate at her son. The invitations to social events dried up. Her circle of friends, the one she used to brag to about Isabella's perfection, started avoiding her calls. Victor didn't escape unscathed, either. The resort industry, his entire career, ran on reputation. Word spread that he was having some troubles at home. And just like that, his boss stopped trusting him with the major client accounts. The man who had once strode through five-star hotel lobbies with an air of importance was now effectively demoted, relegated to managing regional bookings from a sad, peeling cubicle. His pride, the thing he valued most in the world, was being systematically crushed. And Isabella? She had lost her most potent weapon. After Mr. Dahl had vouched for me and the police had taken my side, her word was no longer gospel. People in the family, in the neighborhood, started to question her stories. And without me there to fetch and carry and fix everything, she was forced to experience life like the rest of us, with effort, with consequences. From what I heard through the grapevine, she ended up working as a barista at a coffee shop, posting sad, philosophical Instagram captions about the grind. Reality check, served boiling hot. I never gloated publicly. I never posted a single thing about it. But internally, watching their perfect little world crumble from a safe distance was the most satisfying feeling I had ever experienced. Not because I wanted revenge for its own sake, but because the world was finally seeing them for who they really were. And I wasn't their mule anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat or their servant. I was just a guy 1,000 miles away, finally free and living his own life. Every paycheck I earned, every late-night brainstorming session at my new job, every quiet, peaceful evening in my own crappy apartment was proof that I had made it out. They could scream and whine and crumble all they wanted inside that house that was no longer a home. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. The best part was knowing that I had done it smartly. I hadn't just run away in a fit of anger. I had designed an escape so tight, so calculated, that they couldn't twist the narrative and use it against me. I had evidence in my pocket, a job lined up, and a whole new life waiting for me. And now, when I look back, I don't see a kid who was trapped. I see the guy who played the long game, stacked the deck in his own favor, and walked away with the one thing they said he'd never have: control. And while I was busy building something real for myself in Seattle, Their entire enterprise back home began to collapse from every possible angle. It wasn't even me pulling the strings anymore. They were a self-destructing machine. Mr. Rosie was the first one to give me the updates. He told me he had run into Victor at the hardware store and that the man looked like a ghost of his former self. Apparently, Claudia and Victor were now fighting constantly. Claudia screamed that Victor had let me get away. Victor would snap back that Claudia was the one who had turned the house into a circus in the first place. And Isabella was apparently yelling at both of them, claiming that they had ruined her life because she now had to do everything on her own. The perfect little family unit that had once been so united against me was now devouring itself from the inside out. The weird thing was, I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt detached, as if I had escaped from a cage of wild animals and was now watching them fight each other from a safe distance. And the financial problems hit them hard. Without me there to carry all the weight, to do the free repairs, to pay for small emergencies out of my own pocket, to save them time and money on every conceivable chore, their finances started to spiral. Victor's salary was reduced due to his demotion at work. Claudia's little social gatherings, which had always come with their own side benefits of networking and status, dwindled to nothing. The bills started to pile up. The credit cards were maxed out. Word spread that the house was in pre-foreclosure. Mr. Dahl told me he'd seen the official notice taped to their front door one morning. There was no hiding that. It was as public as it gets. Victor had to sell his nice car. Claudia had to pawn the jewelry that she used to wear like it was her crown. When people saw them shopping at discount grocery stores, they would look away, pretending not to recognize them. For people who had built their entire identity on bragging rights and social standing, the fall was brutal. Then came the little things, the updates that made me chuckle the most. Isabella had tried to move out on her own, making a big public show of her independence. She barely lasted 4 months before she had to move back home because rent and reality had eaten her alive. Claudia had sent me a long, rambling email trying to guilt-trip me. "Your sister is crying herself to sleep every night, and it's her fault," she wrote. I read it twice, laughed out loud, and then deleted it. For once, her tears were not my problem to solve. The scar on my cheek from the plate has faded now to a faint, silvery line. I'll never try to cover it up. If someone asks about it, I just shrug and say, family stuff. Because the real story isn't in the scar itself. The real story is that I walked away from the people who gave it to me and never, ever looked back. 5 years after I left, I received one last email. There was no subject line, just a wall of text soaked in desperation. It was from Claudia. She said that they were falling apart, that the expenses were crushing them. Victor was stuck in his dead-end job, and Isabella was just drifting with no prospects and a bitter attitude. "You're doing so well now," she wrote. "We see your pictures. Please, can you help us?" I sat there in my comfortable apartment in Seattle, reading her words, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not smug satisfaction, just a quiet, empty blankness. I pressed the delete button without a moment's hesitation. And in that moment, I knew that I had truly, finally won. Not because their lives had fallen apart, but because I had finally, completely stopped caring. So, if you're out there, stuck in a family that treats you like a mule, listen to me. You do not owe them your entire life just because you share some blood. Play the long game. Document everything. Save the proof. Build your exit strategy in the silence. And when the day comes, you walk away cold. You do not wait for their apologies. You do not beg for their blessing. You leave so cleanly that they can never, ever pull you back into their chaos. Because the best revenge isn't throwing their words back in their faces. The best revenge is building a life so far beyond their reach that the only thing they can do is choke on the dust you've left behind. The servant was the only one who ever figured out how to truly be free.